Good morning. Welcome to Adult Ed. And as you can see, we have multiple presenters today. I'm going to introduce our guests, who we are very excited to finally have back by popular demand. Several years ago, they were with us, and people were like, please have them back, please have them back. So finally, we were able to make the arrangements with Har Ye and Nick. So our guest today, Dr. Har Ye Kan, is a community planner, a teacher, and a sojourner. She grew up on the tropical island of Singapore. She has a BA from the University of Cambridge, an AM from Harvard University Graduate School of Arts and Science, and her doctorate is from the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. The AICP that follows her name is from the American Institute of Certified Planners. She is the co-author last year with William Johnson of a book entitled Framework Thinking, Lessons in Community Planning and Design. And Nicholas Rolinski is using the theme of home that we are using for Lent. His hometown, see how I use that? That word has come up more often. His hometown is Holland, Michigan. He has a bachelor's and a master's in mechanical engineering from the University of Dayton and a master's in architecture from the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture, which he's popularly wearing very, very well today. Because I understand he's also an adjunct assistant professor of the practice at the University of Notre Dame School of Architecture as well, and does some work with Hope College, or has done some work with Hope College as well. He's also a member of the Board of Trustees at the Holland Museum. And you will see Nick next week as well, but we'll talk about more about that later. As you can also see, we have Hope Church members, Terry and Cindy Veldheer DeYoung and Ann Saliers, who are joining us today because they have been involved in some of this inclusive residential design that we're going to talk about today. So thank you. We are very glad that you were finally able to be with us again. Thank you.
Okay, is this working? Is this? Yep. Okay. Excellent. Well, it's great to be here with you this morning again, and I will just kick us off and just share with you that we've enjoyed meeting as a group and discussing the projects that are real-life projects that your fellow church members have stepped through in their personal lives. And we're going to talk about kind of the nitty-gritty of those projects, what some of the design considerations might have been throughout those, through the lens of this big topic. And we have it titled today, Free to Be You and Me, Inclusive Residential Design. So we're just going to give a brief overview. Inclusive design and why it matters. We hope to talk about that throughout the presentation, as well as perhaps reflect a little bit about that towards the end. Homes for You and Me, and we're going to look at the Veldheer DeYoung home as well as the Johnston Saliers projects, both here in town. And then we'll have hopefully quite a bit of time for Q&A.
And so with that, we thought we might start to lay a high-level overview of what we mean by inclusive design and to give you a sense of how inclusive design really evolved from several other key concepts. One of which is really the notion of accessibility and accessible design, which is a little different from universal design and inclusive design. And accessibility as well as accessible design really started back in the 1990s with the landmark ADA civil rights law that was put in place, and that was the very first time where by law you now had legal codes and requirements to design for accessibility. This was very much based from the perspective of physical abilities and improving really the built environment to enhance its accessibility. And whether that would be your sites, your grounds, your parking lots, all the way to ramps, entries, the minimum number of multifamily units that need to have accessible units within a whole development, for instance. And that really was the fundamental framework for putting in place and really improving some of the built areas around us. Now, what's really different and what's happened since then is that universal design and inclusive design have emerged more as philosophies, principles, as well as then design approaches. That's very different from law and very different from designing for compliance. In both our worlds, we see this really as the bare minimum. The next two philosophies try to push it above the norm and to really say, how can we do that with quality, with dignity, as well as participation? Universal design really emerged in 1989 and really took shape in 1997 through the North Carolina State University College of Design, where through a lens of research and a mixture of architects, of product designers, industrial designers, they truly broaden this notion of accessibility into universal design, where the goal there really was to make spaces that can be used by the greatest number of people of all abilities and of all ages. And so it expanded from just looking at abilities and physical abilities to ages as well as abilities. And the belief there was that there was no one-size-fits-all approach, and that it needed to move beyond function to be able to take into consideration all of the different aspects and to really bring the human focus back into design. From your larger scale landscape planning all the way down to how a chair is designed, or if you have doors that are able to slide automatically open and close, right, versus doors where you have to press a button or sometimes wait for somebody to hold the door open for you. And so that's a whole different level of understanding design and really being more proactive about that. Now, this is not enshrined in law. This is still very much about guidelines, and it's very much based on principles. Last but not least, and what we want to focus on today is really inclusive design. And this emerged also in the 1990s, and this work was pretty much pushed to the fore, and the word really, the phrase inclusive design came about, in fact, in 1994. If you think about it, it's been 30 plus years of the professions as well as society really wrestling with what this all means. And this emerged really in England. University of Cambridge has a toolkit for inclusive design, and this takes it to a whole other level, which says beyond age, beyond abilities, we're also going to consider your social and cultural background, your physiological needs, your cognitive needs as well. And so that's another process. This one truly emphasizes designing with somebody, not just designing for somebody. And the emphasis here really is on participation of the different users to truly say, we can step into your shoes and help us understand how can we better design those spaces. And so with that, we wanted to share with you, before jumping into residential design, what are some of the projects around, especially this country, that have pushed the envelope of universal design beyond just your basic ADA standards. This is one of the leading examples, the Ed Roberts campus in Berkeley, California, that was opened in 2010, that really is emblematic of universal design and transit-oriented design. It combines a community space, and it takes a leaf out of the Guggenheim Museum, where you now really have a ramp that takes you across all of the different levels. It also takes into account the use of circular spaces, natural lighting, and where it's not just about your physical ability, but ways in which you're picking up the visual cues, where you're not tiring out your eyes, and you're also thinking about ways in which people start to interact. These are the different aspects that went into design of the Ed Roberts campus. We've talked about the vertical circulation. There was also visual contrast, as you can tell, from the bright red ramp to how it distinguishes from the rest of the environment, the visible signage, and some of the automatic doors. Now, one other example, and I won't delve into details, I just want to give you a high-level overview, is the St. Coletta School, and this is in Washington. My apologies. And this is in Washington, D.C. This is a school for students with special needs, and they now have multiple campuses. This was really designed in a way to help people with cognitive abilities, to navigate around the environment. And what you see is that different rooms are of different colors, because colors, in this case, are a way of understanding the environment, and that plays a big part. Rooms of different colors are associated with different uses. The yellow room, for instance, for dining and socializing. This teal room really for arts and crafts, and then the purple room for meetings. Other key features that you might see are not just a mixture of natural lighting, but adequate interior lighting. This tiny detail over here, if you pay attention to it, is to allow everybody of different abilities, a wheelchair user, as well as others who might just be standing or walking, to be able to dine together in the same space. The third example that I do want to show you here is something called Deaf Space. And the leading project here is the Gallaudet University that's based in Washington, D.C. This is a private university that was started back in the 1980s and really has been at the forefront of thinking about how do you create environments for people with different hearing abilities. And that's really different because for most of us doing planning and design, it's a very visually driven environment. For somebody who actually has different hearing abilities, the way in which they experience the environment is so different. And this really comes back into, do you have additional panels? If you take a look around at this room, it embodies a lot of the great principles of Deaf Space. You have panels that allow you to see through so that you can actually understand what are the different activities around you. We are anchored in the corner of the room so that we can then have 360 views of all of you, and you can likewise then have the same of us. And then likewise, if you look at all the curves around here, that enables additional space for people who are signing with each other to actually see around the corners. But it's also one in which, as you look at the materials, how it reflects off the walls, the carpet, as well as the ceiling, it really helps to soften the amount of background noise that you have. One of the great examples of an app that Dr. David Myers shared with me is the Soundprint. And having apps like that really heighten your ability as designers and planners to say, how can we better pay attention to the material choices that we have in the environments around us so that we can design it for people of all abilities. And in this case, as you age, you start to have cochlear implants, you start to have hearing aids. How can we also start to be proactive in creating those environments? So that really gives you a snapshot of where we have moved really from the basics of accessibility and ADA all the way to other aspects in which the environment can be considered more holistically. And why this matters? This matters because, in fact, across America, 1 in 4 people actually experience disability in their lives. It's actually a lot more than what we think. And in terms of older adults, the number of people 65 and older will now be 1 in 4 in less than 5 years' time. And that's a reality that we have to grapple with. Now, the number of children who are less than 5 years old in Ottawa County is just 5%. But the key thing here is if you can design doors and spaces for people who might have walkers, who might have wheelchair needs, you're equally designing for people and families with strollers. And that's a huge plus. Last but not least is the number of children in schools that have special needs and who require special education. That number is not just in the elementary schools. The importance of having spaces to support children, as well as all the way through young adults with those special needs, is just as vital. And that also speaks to some of the public spaces, commercial spaces, civic spaces, and sacred spaces that we have. So with that, I'll pass it over to Nick.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about some different areas and realms within our lives where this topic of inclusive design can make a difference. And today we're going to talk about physical, tangible examples of in the home. And there are indoor spaces, like Har Ye just mentioned in the examples. There's this room, indoor spaces which are public, which are academic, which might be civic, sacred, or even commercial, and then the outdoor realm. And we want to encourage always that we're thinking about all these different realms as kind of on a continuum where these universal design principles, these accessibility principles are in play, and where there is opportunity to enhance the social experience, the experience of being in community with one's own dignity, and the interaction between community members in each of these spaces. And we want to think about the ways in which these spaces lend themselves to that, or perhaps encumber that. So we can think about this being somewhat delineated in terms of the home, which is by and large private space, even if we're opening up that space to social activity. And then this idea of shared spaces, which can be in larger spaces like this, interiors, as well as outdoors. We also have this spectrum or this continuum that ranges professions. And so we want to make sure that there's an awareness of all the lenses that go into this kind of thinking. So it ranges from interior design, architecture, urban planning and design, landscape architecture, engineering, and construction. And even Har Ye mentioned before, even the design of the chair, or having that lens of industrial designers who play a big role in the design of objects that we use in our daily life. That would also be in this mix. And then all the way at the far end of the mix, the idea of engineering and construction, and really acknowledging the fact that when we get into the nitty-gritty of a project, we might have designs on paper or in our computers that have striven to contemplate all of the good universal design principles and aspects, but it's still got to be put together, and it still has to somewhat adhere to the way somebody might prefer to put together a building, or the way in which local codes might be enforceable and prevailing over a project, the way in which materials may be available, and we've experienced that over the past 7 or 8 years with COVID coming through, and then just the construction costs and cost of materials just really kind of changing things in the landscape of construction, and just preferred methods that a builder might have. And I don't just mean that they might have a preference that's a personal taste thing, but maybe they have more comfort with a construction method that they've used before, and therefore they have more comfort to price something out or to step into a project and feel like they can deliver on it, versus something that we might draw that they've never done, or it's something that we've drawn that's calling for materials or an application of a certain technology that they've not done before. And so their real-world experience becomes very central, and they're a key participant and contributor to the whole picture of universal design.
And so we thought we might just show you some examples of how universal design can play into the many different types of spaces that we experience on a day-to-day basis, starting with your streets. And what you see here is not just the most obvious yield signs, that's bright yellow with the color contrast or the stripes. You see bike lanes for different types of people, and pedestrians, cyclists, cars can all use and share the same space. The rapid flashing beacons that are just as important, your tactile paving, these are small details that are important, especially in a busy urban environment. Some of the spaces that have really become a lot more sensitive and mindful of children of different abilities and needs, and the way in which an environment can sometimes overstimulate you. And what I love about museums is that most recently they start to have quiet sensory rooms or offer some of your headsets to be able to create a calm space for people to retreat to and to feel things on the wall to calm themselves down.
Go back to the tree slide real quick.
Okay.
Well, one thing I just wanted to chime in on this that's really striking, and I think we have a lot of strength in this community around, is that tree canopy and the fact that it's providing shade. And if we're thinking about all users, we're thinking obviously about users who may not have access to a car that day or a ride that day. And so they're having to take a walk in this public space, and if it's a hot summer day, they're benefiting from that filtered light that's coming through that tree canopy. The other thing the tree canopy is doing for us in this particular view is it's giving kind of a sense of enclosure. It's a canopy, so it's kind of like it's a roof or a ceiling to this outdoor room that's belonging to everybody. And so when we're in that space, it's got a real distinct sense of public space and enclosure. And so that's beneficial, I think, to all the users as well.
And so the key thing to note here is if you live in a city or if you live in a township, as you see future street reconstructions happening, remember to ask them about the trees. I drive my children to Columbia Avenue, and that whole reconstruction, they took out all the mature trees, none have been replanted, and we're going to experience some of the biggest differences in temperatures. However, that doesn't mean it cannot be phased in. I think as citizens, as residents, it's just being able to proactively advocate for it. So outdoor spaces, places for children to play. This is one example in the Seattle area here in the city of Holland. Kudos to the Parks and Recreation Department. There is an inclusive playground at Moran Park. And it's not just the physical objects in the space that are vital to the way in which we experience it. The City of Holland Parks and Recreation has also created an adaptive sports program with Hope College, Kinesiology Department, Special Olympics Michigan, to be able to have programming and activities to be able to bring more people into the use of space besides having the space itself. Quiet spaces for children, which is really just as cute. And this also translates to indoor environments. If you think about the way in which Hayworth, Herman Miller, they are now creating indoor booths. They call them hush stations because sometimes you just need to duck into a quiet space to work versus in an open office environment. And the last one here really is about ways in which we can make our spaces culturally welcoming. This is an example in Portland where you have basically small business incubator space called the Portland Mercado. And what I'm not showing off the screen is really a series of food trucks in which this is a space for the Hispanic community to come and to be able to test out their businesses. And here in Muskegon, for instance, they have the Western Market, which also takes that same concept of enabling smaller businesses. So with that, I'll hand it over to Nick, and then we can really focus on the interviews with our guests today.
Great. So I'll just briefly introduce these two projects and then get into a bit of Q&A with our experts on these two projects. So the first one on your left is the Veldheer DeYoung corner porch. It's in Holland Heights at East 10th Street. It obviously, by definition, it's a corner porch and it's on a corner lot, and so there was always thinking that went into how does this thing address both Glendale and 10th Street that the house faces. And so it's kind of got double duty, and you can notice that here in the historic district, how houses that are on corners do that really well. The construction time was about 8 months. I think the design time and the discernment period was quite a bit longer than that as we went through quoting and we went through kind of thinking about the overall scope. The design team included the owners, Terry and Cindy, as well as myself, as well as Paul Elzinga, played a huge role and is here today. Har Ye Kan was also involved in the early thinking as well as the design of the porch itself. And then the builder included the homeowners themselves who participated in prepping materials and getting things ready. And actually, Cindy, your dad was involved in a lot of kind of the day-to-day moving things along. And then Kurt Volbada was also the builder of this project. And there's a picture of the porch dedication evening where neighbors and friends were gathered on the porch. And that was a lovely evening to kind of christen, so to speak, that outdoor, private, but also public space and kind of neighborhood gesture of a little addition. And then the Saliers-Johnston renovation is over off of South Shore Drive on Hiawatha, also here in the city of Holland. And you undertook a major renovation, converting 4-bed, 2-bath home into a 3-bed, 2.5-bath, slightly larger home, 15 months of living with construction. Your architect was Andy Baer, and your builder Homes by Homes. And so both of these, you can drive by and see them. They're both striving to not upend or totally transform the home from what it was, or the neighborhood or the block from what it was, but to, in a sensitive way, insert some of these universal design principles for those current chapters in life. So why don't we go ahead and I'm going to ask you some questions about your project. So, Anne, maybe we can start with you. How did you undertake the design and construction process, and what was that process like? Oh, and we'll also hit the what and the why. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Do you have some questions that you want to answer? Okay, so let's start with the what and the why. Why don't you kind of summarize for us the impetus for your project?
Okay, thank you. It's good to see all of you. And after 10 years of dating, Bob and I got married in 2018. And it took us a long time to decide where we were going to live. Was it my condo, his house, or find a different house? And all three solutions had pros and cons to it, but we ultimately landed on his house, and knowing that we would be heading into a renovation. And we were also at another nexus in that we were soon going to be entering retirement. And so it, that was looming in a few years. And, as retirees, and maybe you experience this too, is you start to do some nesting because you're entering a new chapter in life. And so we were also trying to combine two households. And by the time you're in your late 60s, you have a lot of stuff. And so, how do we combine that and fit it into, all into a smaller house that meets our goals? So do you want me to talk about goals or? So anyway, the house was, and by the handout, my intent there was to give you a thought starter list of things you might look at your own living situation and think of the low cost, no cost kinds of things you could do, and those that are more extensive. But the house was built in 1954, just your typical ranch. Here you're seeing the original kitchen. The site-made cabinets had no drawer slides, no backstop on the drawers. And everything was really quite dated. And so we did enter into a pretty extensive renovation where we were trying to be able to stay in the home as long as possible. Age in place is a term you hear often, but still accommodate guests and visitors. I was becoming a grandmother for the first time, so how can the house support having grandchildren, as well as a dear friend of mine has MS, and how could, I didn't like the thought of that she couldn't come to visit me. I couldn't host her because she didn't have a way to get into the house. So those were some considerations. And so aging in place, it meant main floor living. The house is a walkout ranch, so 2 of the bedrooms are on the main floor and 2 were downstairs, a full bath on each floor. And so we needed to move the laundry room from the basement upstairs. That was a big factor. Also, in 1954, bathrooms were quite small, and the doorways even smaller. So, a 20-inch wide doorway into the bathroom isn't wide enough. A basic walker is 23 inches wide. So we really needed to make a primary bathroom. So our first thought was, let's just add a bedroom suite off the back of the house and add a laundry room. And so we got together with Andy Bear as an architect and drew that up, got a couple of quotes from builders, and oh my goodness, did we have sticker shock. It was like $365,000. And so we couldn't do that. And part is with it being a walkout ranch, we had to build that foundation space and the whole floor underneath of it in order to have a primary bedroom and a suite on the main floor. So a constraint became living within the footprint that the house was we already had. and we ended up gaining more space. You can see from the exterior shot that there was a breezeway between the garage and the house, and that was at ground level, not conditioned space. So we enclosed that and brought the floor up to the height of the regular main floor. And also you can see a bit how the front entrance was just a stoop. The front porch was just a little cutout of the house, and no place to put chairs or anything. But we also enclosed that, and that gave us some additional square footage. So I think I'll stop there. And
so some of the why on our front porch project, we had visited a chaplain friend in Denver many years ago, and they lived on what might have been a typical neighborhood where they had like two and a half story homes with front porches. And our friend Wayne was telling us how they used their front porch for happy hour with their neighbors. And we're like, this is a really attractive idea. How can we engage our neighbors better with the home we had? A couple of the other whys is you'll see these steps here, they had sunk and deteriorated over time. We knew we needed to change that entry, which we essentially never used when it was in that condition. And then this other entry was our main entry for, friends and neighbors and kids trying to sell us stuff, and wanted to change that to make it easier for people to get in and out. So actually, before we started all of these projects, we extended those kind of steps by that door long ago with some cement extenders, just because it was really tricky getting in and out of there if you were holding anything. So we wanted to engage our neighbors well. We wanted to be aware of our limitations over time, that it would be harder and harder to get in and out of this house. So we knew we needed to change that. And just redoing the entries. And some of the other whys is, early on, we would engage, the city would offer different incentives to do energy checks on your home. I remember being so proud of the certificate we got and being one of the top 50 for energy efficient homes. And we've done some of those energy evaluations over time. We are not perfect in this, and there's a few reasons for that, which I can tell you privately later. But I tell the energy checker guys, these are the things you're going to ding us on right off the bat, so let's get that off the table. One of them has to do with refrigerators, but the other thing is, just general stewardship, taking good care of your home, wanting it to stay in good shape, good use of resources, awareness of limits, and honesty about what we would need to function well in this home. Long before we put this siding on, we also updated the windows as part of insulation, awareness of energy. Hospitality and inclusion, of course, were some big factors. So those were some of the whys.
Okay, so how did you undertake the design process and the construction process? And Ann, we'll start with you. And what was that process like for you?
I think this is still on, yes. Well, some of the, maybe going back to what we were trying to accomplish with aging in place was we wanted a zero-step entry and, low threshold for wheelchairs, have a ramp that blends with the landscaping, so it's not real obvious that it's a ramp. Well, you can read on the list of a lot of the things that we did, but process-wise, we hired an architect, probably spent a year on plans and designs, and I already told you about the, our first idea didn't pan out, and so we went back to the drawing board. And also, it's kind of like, how do you finance a big project like this? And to preserve capital in our IRAs so that those could continue to grow, we financed it partly from equity from selling my condo, but primarily with a mortgage, and that allowed us to get a construction loan that then converted to a mortgage. We were fortunate in that, we did catch when the interest rates were at their lowest, and so we were able to do it that way. And then the other nice thing is that the contractor then gets paid by the bank, and it gets us out of the middle, and there's more accountability that way.
And did you have a challenge at all with explaining kind of the goals of the project to the bank in terms of the aging in place and some of the universal design aims, or is the bank pretty easy to work with when it came to that?
The bank was easy to work with when it came to that. That really didn't matter or influence their decision. It was all about, what will the house assess for when the project's completed. And yeah.
And another entity that you had to work with was the city of Holland, right? Could you share a little bit more about who you worked with and how that permitting process was like for you?
Okay, so in not really knowing who the architects are in the community and what kinds of work they like to do, I did contact it was Phil Meyer at the time, who was the director of community and neighborhood services at the city. And that's the group that has all of the building inspectors that would be involved in the permitting and that sort of thing. And so they actually, even the architect we got by recommendations from Phil. And then through the architect, that led us to a couple of builders, and then we decided between those two. So that's how, it was a really good resource. So I encourage you to contact that group. So we were thinking that if we made all of these changes to the house for aging in place, and if it could help us stay in our home even 2-3 years longer, rather than needing to move to a nursing home, that the project would pay for itself. And I think we still feel that way. So we began the demolition in January of 2000, and as Nick said, it took us about 15 months. And they renovated the lower level first, and then we moved to the lower level, and then they started in on the first floor. So another plus was we were able to stay in the home and be right there through every step of the construction and catch things as they were happening.
And when you got connected with the architect, how did the home builder come into the picture?
The architect recommended some different builders that do renovations. Some builders only want to do new build, or some builders work on projects that are way above our means. And so it was Andy, the architect, helped, and then we got quotes from 2 of those builders and then decided which one to work with.
And Terry and Cindy, same question to you. How did you undertake the design and construction project, and what did that process look like for you?
Is this on? Yes. Okay. No, you can hear me?
It's picking up your voice, but it's not very loud.
All right, there we go, sorry. Back in 2010, Ruth Stegman, member of this congregation, I don't know if Ruth's here this morning, was at that time Executive Director of Disability Network Lakeshore. And Disability Network Lakeshore was involved in some community discussions around belonging and inclusion. And Ruth started a book group using Peter Block book, Community, the Structure of Belonging. John Schmidt was in that group, Chris Spalding from Herman Miller, some other people. And it was and I was as well, and it was in those conversations that I really got to appreciate the value, the benefits of a porch, a front porch. You know, we spent most of our time in the summer on our back deck, which was isolated, secluded from the neighborhood. A porch is just the opposite. It's out front. We're on a corner lot, and we really appreciated that. And for years, we'd been thinking about how to add a ramp to our home, which by itself is actually a barrier to engagement with the neighborhood when it's out front. We were concerned about a ramp that was protected from the elements, that you didn't have to shovel in the winter, and really a front porch that was open and inviting, that did not have, that limited as much as possible railings, steps, screens even, that just kind of isolated it more and more. So in, I think it was 2019, started asking around builders that I'd heard about, and we were connected to Nick, and then Nick connected us to Har Ye. And they both sat down and interviewed us, talked about what we were wanting, what kind of hopes and dreams we had for this space. And then Nick got to work on the design, some design concepts. And then COVID happened, or COVID was just about to happen. And in the design process, we needed to either engage the city around a variance because the size of the porch was going to exceed the setback by 4 feet minimum. And we talked to the city and about a couple different options. One was to request a variance, the other was to request an accommodation based on my disability. And we had to go before the Zoning Board of Appeals and had a lengthy, like 6 or 8 page document we had to submit ahead of time with rationale, with plans, with all kinds of things. And it was in January 2021 that we met on Zoom with the Zoning Board of Appeals. They passed that without, I mean, some questions, but they had a choice whether to make this a variance or an accommodation, and they went the accommodation route. So then, yeah, COVID was going on, and finding a builder, getting supplies, and all of that stuff was quite a challenging and lengthy process.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned the rationale that had to be put together, because an easy question that the city or your neighbors might ask is, well, why can't you just make the porch 4 feet less and then not need the variance? And there was rationale having to do with the width of the ramp that was being integrated, as well as the depth of the porch, because at a certain point, if you're giving over some of that depth to the ramp, now you have this kind of little leftover space that's the porch, and there is a certain depth of a porch where it doesn't really work anymore. And so to have that adequate space and to have ultimately the design intent and the spirit of what you really wanted to offer to the neighborhood, you needed that extra 4 to 6 feet at the end of the day.
And we didn't design a ramp that was minimum. We actually made it wider than the minimum to make sure that there was adequate space for more than one person to walk on the ramp, and also adequate space for railings on both sides and not just on one side of the ramp.
And I think the case had to be made by you as the homeowner that this was a kind of an out-of-the-box idea, but as you mentioned, there's a barrier that tends to happen in our minds psychologically when there's kind of a ramp that might be a retrofit type of ramp that's out front of the porch. It kind of has a clinical type of look to it, so that's one thing. But then that sort of dignity aspect of it too, then weaves right into what, Terry, you mentioned with it being under the roof, so that there's, it's hidden away, but it's also, there's a functionality aspect to that. So it's that dignity component plus the functionality component working in concert together, because now the snow shoveling and things like that are completely different on that surface. So that case was, I think you guys did a nice job of teeing that up for the city.
And then the ramp also provided us with a no-step access to the main floor of the home,
Yeah.
which is also important.
Yeah, and I also want to pause on this thing that you went through with the city, and mention that the city, this idea of this special accommodation, it's different than a variance, but it turns out it's right there in the law. The city's laws are already set up so that this can work, and this can be an option for when it's appropriate.
And that would be under the Fair Housing Act, where it would not be a variance, but it would be an accommodation.
We were prepared for the variance part because we wanted to educate our neighbors about what we were doing and not annoy them. So we were trying to do our preparation. We gave them all the information we could. We invited them to ask us questions, to look at the drawings.
Yeah.
And there was, one neighbor in particular we were concerned about, which doesn't everybody have the one neighbor you're worried about. And they seem to be the most enthusiastic supporters of this.
And let's look at kind of your version of that zero-step ramp and that gentle entry into the front entrance that I'll take you back to the original picture real quick too.
Yeah, we also wanted to create an outdoor space on the front side of our home, which happens to face west, because we like watching sunsets in the evening and the seagulls fly out to the lake for the night. And so we, as I mentioned, enclosed the breezeway and also that front, the entrance to the house moved from where these windows are to here. We kept the front door because we love the mid-century windows in the door, but it created a covered porch area where we could sit and not have the hot west sun, but also kind of a patio space with a breeze block wall that creates a bench where people passing by could sit and visit. And this last eclipse we had maybe a year or so ago, the whole porch was full of people watching that. But then, the ramp is integrated into the landscape, but we've got a couple of steps on that side as well. And then the breeze block wall also helps with signaling when the sidewalk or the ramp starts.
Yeah, so that's a visual transition itself. And those visual cues are just as important as your material cues.
And we played off those diamond-shaped windows on the front door, and you can see the scoring in the sidewalk added a design element.
So let's move indoors, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how these design interventions happened inside.
Okay, this is the living room that used to end right about here, and this is the space where the cutout where the front porch was, and you came in. This was a wall, so this is the breezeway space that you're seeing there. So we were able to put in a nice front entry. You're not seeing the nice woodwork console, But coming into the living room, we were basically able to add a music room to the end of the living room. And then we used the couch to help define where the aisleway is. And then the fireplace was at this other end. And so that's the front entry, come around, and then the kitchen. To create one floor living, on the back side of here is a nice size coat closet, and opposite it is where we put the laundry area by bumping into the garage 4 feet. And then we also were able to put in a walk-in pantry. Here's how, and then on the opposite side. So there's like a back hall. So when you come in the front entry, you can either go through the living room, into the living room, or more of a service entrance, a back hallway.
Tell us a little bit about this decision.
Yes, okay. There had been, the kitchen sink is in the original spot, and then there was this peninsula. And it really cut off and made the dining area of the house much smaller than it needed to be. So to open it up, have nice flow, by using architect, we learned that we didn't have to have that header in the doorway between the dining area and the living room. So took it all the way up to the ceiling, pushed it back a bit, and instead of a peninsula, we put in what we call the gathering table. And this shape may look familiar to those of you who know a Noguchi coffee table. I traced that shape and said, can you make it, 4 inches bigger all the way around? And so this is our gathering table instead of having a peninsula. And it just rests on top of the countertop and then has a post. So that gave us the additional dining area. It's fun with the granddaughter. And then just to move on, another thing we did was the microwave, have that be a drawer that comes out and in rather than something you can't reach if you're sitting in a wheelchair. And for maintenance, cleanability, the faucets, fixtures we chose have very few crevices and make it, keeping things really easy to clean and trying to avoid where dirt could build up. We changed all the doorknobs to levers, again, from kind of an ADA. And one of the bedrooms on the main floor we made into a primary bathroom, and then a walk-in shower. And there's, you can kind of tell that there's no curb to that shower. That makes a big difference. Another little thing we did for cleanability is instead of having clear glass, it's a textured glass. So nobody has to squeegee after their shower or worry about streaks. And we did a lot of installing of handrails, and we selected the comfort height toilets. And they were shrouded, so you don't have to clean all the grooves and crevices around the toilet. And even little things like this, Bob has had almost all of his joints replaced, and he had back surgery 15 months ago, and just this little handrail that you can buy for like $10 or so makes a huge difference. So there, once you put on that thinking cap of aging in place, there are many things that can be done. And the grandchildren love the big bathtub. And the shower was sized so that somebody could assist the other person, showering, and with the handheld faucet. So Makes it easy.
Thank you. And Cindy and Terry, can we give them a round of applause, please? Thank you. So while we can continue to ask them more questions, we want to make sure that we give you an opportunity to ask them questions as well, and then we can go around with the mic.
We can, and while you're thinking of your question, I may say that this is being live streamed and recorded, and we invite you to share your name as you share. I'm Larry Schuyler. Dave.
So thank you, Nick and Har Ye. I love the accessible, inclusive design movement. But part of me kind of wonders, on behalf of people with the greatest population, I think, with accessibility needs, people with hearing loss, whether there hasn't been a counter movement within the architectural community, as I've seen modernist restaurants with sound reverberant, high decibel environments. And when requested, could you please have part of this be a more hearing accessible, sound deadening, deaf-friendly environment? But the whole kind of architectural culture seems to me against accessibility for people with hearing loss. You want to comment on that? And by the way, you don't have to carry the mic around.
Okay. Want me to take that first, or you
Yeah,
want to take that?
I would say that yes, there's probably more popularity around kind of harsher spaces, very kind of geometric forms that may lend themselves to sound waves bouncing back and forth and those kinds of things. But I think in general the profession is very interested in not just as kind of a aesthetic position, but as a core tenet of the profession to also have well-designed spaces for speech intelligibility, whether it's speech intelligibility or whether it's just how sound is perceived in terms of its beauty. And so there is thinking and care that goes into that. There's also constraints, which isn't an excuse whatsoever, but in terms of some of the things we just talked about, a recent kind of gathering space that we were involved in, and it's a public kind of restaurant type space. And our friends over here pointed out that like there is some issues that still need to be remedied for that. And part of it in reflecting of like, okay, what has led into some of that? Part of it is fire separation of different spaces. So when you're separating uses, usually you're lining walls and partitions with hard materials that are rated for 1 hour or 2 hours and those kinds of things. There's a cost aspect to parallel boxes. Parallel walls are the cheapest kinds of structures to build, and if we were to have structures like this where we have something that's other than parallel, there could be a cost consideration in that. But on the other hand, this is truly a parallel box that we're in, but then there's these clouds that are kind of sunk in and they're helping to reflect and absorb and all of that. So I think that there's room for improvement on that. However, I would say that I wouldn't say the profession's raging against the direction you're talking about going in.
And to answer your question, David, often the profession itself, there's the practice side of the profession. There's also the education side of the profession, right? How are we training future architects and designers to be more proactive and aware of that? And that's often the slower piece to catch up on. That said, I would say that in the last 5 to 10 years, there has been a movement amongst architectural educators as well as researchers to kind of push the envelope on that. And if you're interested, there are actually 3 books out there on architecture and disability that try to advance that so as to make the practice of the profession more proactive. Those books are Architecture of Disability by David Gisson, Architecture's Disability Problem as a Critique of the Profession, and that's by Vonda Lieberman. And the last one is Elizabeth Guffey's Designing Disability, Symbols, Spaces, and Society. So there is a movement. It really takes time to kind of spread that across the profession. Great question.
Norma Killalay, following up on that, one of the concerns that many of us have had recently is, a discouragement through the equity inclusion activities, and that maybe even in the Department of Education, there's a reduction in concern for care for disabled people. Is there any do you have any comments in terms of whether that's, whether there really is some regression occurring because of the discouragement to corporations for diversity and inclusion, or whether that's not really happening?
I would say, just from a firsthand experience, there is some regression that seems to be happening. Part of it may just be that there's a permission structure for kind of throwing some of these ideas out. People are a little bit more comfortable in just kind of saying these things out loud, like, maybe I don't care as much about this ADA requirement as I used to have to say I cared about, right? And so I've experienced a little bit of that, and I think it's just kind of a cultural regression that's happening in terms of how things are funded and what requirements are being placed on projects. I would say the law is still the law in terms of the ADA and the prevailing building codes, but certainly culturally, firsthand experiences that I've seen that in actual situations.
Now I get to say thank you. Yes, thank you for coming, Nick and Har Ye. Very appreciative, and we're glad that Terry and Cindy and Ann were able to be with us too and share so much about the changes that they have made for inclusive design in their homes. Very helpful. Thank you very much. Deeply appreciated. Regarding next week is Palm Sunday, and Nick will be back with us to talk about, as you can see on page 13 in your bulletin today, building small for affordability, quality, community, and legacy. It's on the newspaper all the time. Nonprofit earns final rezoning approval for affordable housing in Holland. Nick has been a part of that, and he will talk some about that next week. But yep, Benson pitches to plan to address Michigan's housing shortage. We know that affordability housing is in the news. So Nick is going to come back next week and talk about building small. Be with us next week. Speaking of that, I need to ask those of you who will be here next week on Palm Sunday to kind of come forward and be volunteers next week. Larry and I are unable to be here next week, so it would be great if one or two of you would walk up to Judy Parr or Judy Vanderwilt, because they will be coordinating next week. If you would walk up and say, I'm willing to be a mic runner next week. I'm willing to be a mic runner today. So if you would volunteer to do that, that would be very helpful and help them as they put the session together next week. Also, they will also be announcing at the end that those tables will have to go out there because it will be Pizza Sunday also next week. So they're going to tell you that the formula is 3-5-8. That's all you have to remember next week. 3-5-8. 3 rows, 5 tables each, 8 chairs around each table. 3-5-8. So you can help them remember that for next week as well. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I deeply appreciate it.